Have you ever wondered what really goes on behind the screens of the virtual assistants you hire or want to become? The late nights, the impossible clients, the breakthroughs nobody saw coming, the moments that changed everything. I'm Loy Mundo, your VA mentor, and this is the Untold VA Stories. Every episode, we go behind the screen and share the stories that never make it into the highlight reels. Real VAs, real stories, the ones nobody talks about. Okay, imagine this. You're 2 hours into your workday, and let's say you're working on a spreadsheet. You've got your headphones on, and then you're on a focus mode, like quite literally. And that is your Slack setting. So, sa mga VAs dyan na hindi pa alam kung ano yung Slack, it's a communication tool that most virtual assistants and clients use para mag-chat sila doon or di naman kaya magtawagan. About, of course, the job or the task that you need to do for your client. Now, moving on. Because you finally found doon sa trabaho mo yung rhythm after your usual morning pings dyan sa Slack ninyo. Then you look up, 45 minutes have passed na, and in your notifications, 3 messages, a Jira ticket, and a just following up on this na message yung nakita mo. Yun naman pong Jira ticket is another tool that most virtual assistants and clients use to house or hold their tasks and project para ma-monitor nila. So that's not the story. That ends her contract. And that's just Tuesday. The story that ends it happened 3 weeks later in a Google Doc that was supposed to be frozen in time. This is the Untold VA Stories. I'm your host, and this is episode 4. So guys, before we get into it, a quick reminder of how this show works. Every story you hear in my podcast show is real. Totoo siya nangyari. It happened to a real virtual assistant working with a real client through a real staffing agency. But every name, binago ko na of course, for privacy reason. Every company is renamed. Some details are softened just enough that no one listening could point a finger at a real person. Because the point of this show was never to call anyone out. It's to hold up a mirror for virtual assistants, for clients, and of course even for the agencies. So we can all get a little better at this strange, remote trust fall of a working relationship. Today's story, we will call our virtual assistant as Mika. She's sharp, conscientious, she asks a lot of questions, maybe more than most. And for 4 months, she worked for a food media company, which we will call naman Copper Spoon Media. And she got that job through a staffing platform we will call as Talent Spring. And this is her story. And it's a story about 2 things that quietly kill remote working relationships. 1 is unclear instructions, and 2, unclear judgment about when to follow them exactly, and when to pause and ask first. So, si Mika, ang ating bidang VA sa episode na to, landed the Copper Spoon account or project through Talent Spring. The way a lot of these placements happen. There's a recruiter, and we will call that recruiter as Marco. Minatch yung profile niya, ran her through a screening call, and within a week, she was in a Slack channel with her new point of contact, a marketing coordinator at Copper Spoon, which we will call naman, or we will call naman as Nora. The work itself was the kind of thing a lot of marketing virtual assistants will recognize instantly. competitive analysis spreadsheets, pulling social media performance data from a research tool. Think about you get view counts, engagement rates, follower growth for a handful of competitor brands. Updating a shared tracker every week, coordinating with Jira tickets, and writing end-of-day reports. None of that is the interesting part. Wala pa po tayo sa interesting na part ng episode na to. What's interesting is the texture underneath it. The hundreds of small exchanges that, on their own, mean nothing, but stuck together, tell you exactly how this relationship was going to end. Mika, by the way, was diligent, almost aggressively diligent. She asked clarifying questions constantly. As a VA, of course, that's a good quality. And she would ask, should I download this way or that way? Is this the right tab? Are these the numbers supposed to be rounded? Should I disregard the upload date? On one hand, that's exactly what you want from a virtual assistant, right? Handling a client data. Someone who doesn't guess, who double checks before she commits an answer to a spreadsheet a client is going to present internally. On the other hand, and we will come back to this, that many questions, that often, is also a signal. Sometimes it means I care about getting these things exactly right. And sometimes it means naman I don't yet have the judgment to know which decisions are mine to make alone and which ones needs a check-in first. So both were true about our VA, Mika. And that tension is the whole story. So about a month in, the first real crack showed up. It's not a mistake exactly. It's silence. Nora, yung supervisor ni Mika sa client side, messaged Mika mid-morning with a question about a certain report. However, there was no response from Mika, our VA. So, an hour later, Nora followed up. Still nothing. And then again, there's another follow-up. Almost 2 hours after the first message, Nora said, checking in again, "Are you available?" Mika finally replied. She'd had her Slack's focus mode turned on. So, sa hindi pa po nakakagamit ng Slack, there is a feature there where when you click it, you will be on a focus mode. Meaning, even if there's notification or even a call na darating sa Slack ninyo, hindi nyo siya maririnig or makikita. Simply because, yun nga, naka-focus mode kayo. Ibig sabihin, bawal kayong i-disturb while working. So, in-on or tinurn on ni Mika yung focus mode ng kanyang Slack. So, it's a setting that silences notifications and hadn't realized it was also blocking messages from coming through. So, nag-apologize si Mika. In-explain niya yon and nag-move on na siya. Here's the thing that makes this a genuinely interesting case. And not just a VA missed a message story ito. Mika didn't just apologize once. She overcorrected really hard. She told Nora, yung supervisor niya na client, she'd stop using the focus mode sa Slack nila entirely during work hours. She stopped a scheduled clock in and clock out routine because someone had once told her hindi naman daw necessary yon. So, ang backstory doon is Mika would schedule a message in Slack na nag-clock in na siya. So, let's say magka-clock in siya ng 9 o'clock ng gabi sa Manila time. So, i-message niya yun, iti-draft niya, and then, sa Slack kasi, you could schedule a message kung kailan siya lalabas or mababasa nung recipient ng message mo. So, yung clock in niya and clock out niya, ganun yung ginagawa niya. Ini-schedule niya. yung message. So, she removed na rin yung tracking tab from a shared sheet and move her end of day logs to a separate Google Doc instead of reasoning that it would be cleaner. So every one of those decisions on its own, no? Kasi reasonable naman yon na ganun yung maging desisyon ni Mika on how she would work. Taken together, they added up to something else. Mika was quietly redesigning her own workflow, unilaterally. Ibig sabihin ng unilaterally, si Mika lang yung nag-decide, yung VA lang, based on her own read of what would be more efficient, without looping in the person actually managing her day-to-day. So, hindi niya sinasabihan yung kanyang kliyente, in short, na yun pala yung mga changes na ginagawa niya behind the scene. Pero maliliit lang na bagay. Pero here, a few days later, the agency's account manager, yun namang manager na yon, coming from the agency, we will call her as Marisol. So, a few days later, she got pulled in and said, the client raised some concerns. No? Yun yung message ni Marisol kay Mika. Do you have time to connect today? On the call, Marisol delivered a piece of feedback that sounds small but is actually one of the most important lines in this entire story. It's important to remain responsive during your scheduled working hours. If you need to use a focus mode, let the client know in advance and follow up once you're available again. So Mika took the note well naman. Noted Marisol, sabi ni Mika, thank you for the reminder. She wrote on their chat. Mika even went back afterward and corrected her own account of what happened. She'd misremembered which message had gone unanswered first, and she came back to fix the record rather than let the smaller version of the story stand. That's worth pausing on because it's genuinely to her credit. A lot of people kasi once they've apologized and move on, they don't circle back to correct themselves for the sake of, accuracy when nobody's checking. Pero si Mika, ginawa niya. But notice what this moment really was. It wasn't a one-off slip. It was the first data point in a pattern the client was already tracking. Is this person going to make decisions on her own that affect how reachable, how predictable, or how on the same page she is with us without checking first? Yun yung mga tumatakbo sa ulo ng client. Fast forward a few weeks, Mika, our VA, is fully embedded in the account now. She's pulling monthly data for a competitive analysis report. It's actually a big spreadsheet now that they are tracking yung mga video views, engagement, and follower growth across a handful of competitor food brands, feeding into a deck that gets shared out to the other people at the company. And here's where we get into that part of the story that actually nag-end ng things for Mika. At some point, a finalized version of that particular deck, so a deck that had already been distributed company-wide. So it's what you call this? It's a Google presentation, parang ganon. So it was already distributed company-wide by manager. That other people were actually actively opening it and looking at it. So believing they were looking at a finished, lacked end-of-month report. Okay, and it got updated by Mika. The June data daw was replaced with July. So, live siya na na-replace. While people had been on the document, looking at what have been a previous month's data. So, picture that from the other side for a second, ha? You're a stakeholder sa Copper Spoon. So, let's say ikaw yung may-ari ng Copper Spoon. And you were looking into that particular report and you're supposed to see yung previous month na data. So you open it during the meeting or to a reference number in a follow-up email. And then the numbers in front of you have quietly became yung current month na numbers or data without anyone telling you the document has been changed. You don't know what really happened. No? Ikaw as the business owner or may-ari ng copper spoon, hindi mo alam na napalitan na pala to the most current month yung yon. You just know that at some point, something you were told was final. And it wasn't pala. So, actually, that's not a math error. That's not a wrong number in a cell. That's a trust problem. Because the entire point of calling something finalized is that people downstream get to stop double-checking it. The moment a finalized, distributed document quietly changes underneath its readers, everyone who touched that report after the fact has a reason to wonder what else might have moved without them knowing. When Marisol, the one from the agency, later explained this to Mika, she didn't frame it as, Mika, you made a mistake in the data or something like that. She framed it as a judgment problem, layered on top of the focus mode na incident na nangyari na, and apparently other small frictions along the way. The message blunt, the client had, like they say, ongoing concerns around following instructions and overall judgment. And this was like a more recent situation that contributed to their decision, okay, to the client's decision. Now, to be fair naman to Mika, and this actually matters, nowhere in the record is there evidence she was ever explicitly told na never edit a finalized distributed report in place. Always duplicate it first. So there was no mention sa Slack communications na dapat palang yung hindi na dapat na munang ini-edit. At yung mga ganong report dapat i-assume na munang distributed na, and Mika should have waited for the client to tell her na sige, pwede mo nang i-update. So walang ganong communication nangyari. And of course, yun nga, yung kiniklaim daw ng kliyente na dapat bago ginawa ni Mika yung pag-update ng report, dinuplicate niya na muna yung report. So there was in the communications daw and in the guide or SOP na ganun dapat palang gagawin ni Mika. So that's not a rule most companies kasi write down. Okay? It's usually just common sense, understood na dapat yon. Now, tribal knowledge, the kind of thing you only learn the hard way, once ideally on something low stakes. So, si Mika didn't get the low stakes version of that lesson, unfortunately. She got it on a document that had already gone out of the door. So, the actual termination came through their communication tool, yung Slack. It wasn't even a call. So Marisol from the agency messaged Mika directly. The client had decided to conclude the engagement. No need to continue daw with any further work. Obviously, Marisol thanked Mika for her time and effort, and importantly, she was honest about the reason even though she didn't have to be. She named the concerns, the pattern of instruction following, and judgment. The recent incident with the deck, yung presentation nga. Mika's response is honestly the most human moment in this whole story. She thanked Marisol. She said she understood this might come as a surprise, especially given the recent access issue. Yeah. All of a sudden kasi daw, nawalan ng access na sa lahat ng tools na ginagamit si Mika. No? And it's a nod to something that had clearly already been simmering before this conversation even started. And then she asked genuinely for more detail. Of course, if you were also the VA, you would probably also ask, ano yung detalye why she got terminated. So, it was, according to Mika, not to argue naman or not to push back. She said she'd really appreciate any additional context or specific examples so she could understand what happened and actually take the feedback with her. So kayo din, ganun ang gagawin nyo. As a VA, hindi lang yung komot nasabihan na nga kayo na mataterminate na yung contract, kahayaan nyo na. You dive deeper into the reasons why you were terminated. And para yung lessons from there, madala nyo at hindi na maulit pa doon sa mga susunod na magiging clients nyo. So, that's not what defensiveness, for me, it doesn't sound defensive. That's what somebody is trying to actually learn from a loss sounds like. Okay? So, like I said, Mika was just trying to learn from her mistakes, if ever meron man. And then, in the same breath, she said she was genuinely grateful for the opportunity and for the experience she gained working for that client. And she asked two very practical, very human questions. When would her final pay arrive, and was she still eligible to be matched with other clients through the agency? So si Marisol, the lady from the agency, gave her the context she asked for. Confirmed the final invoice would be included in the next scheduled payment, and Marisol also confirmed, and actually this is very important, that Mika's profile would stay active and the agency would still reach out if a future opportunity fit her skill set. Okay, so makita nyo din dito, supportive pa rin ng agency despite the fact na na-terminate na nga itong kanilang VA. So, that last part is worth sitting with. This wasn't a story where someone's got fired and blacklisted. So, hindi naman siya na-blacklist, no, si Mika, kahit na-terminate na nga yung kanyang engagement with this particular client. It was a story where one specific client relationship ended, and it was clean, it was professional, and both sides, and the door for future work still stayed open. So let's do the thing this show exists to do. Let's actually break down where the fault sits, because it's too complicated isn't the right answer here. It's a dodge. Where Mika, the VA, could have done better. So the focus mode incident and the deck inside share the same root cause. She made a unilateral call about how to handle something ambiguous without pausing to ask, is this mine to decide alone? Turning off notifications during work hours, restructuring her own reporting workflow, editing a document that had already been called final and sent out the door, none of these were malicious. All of them were Mika deciding on her own judgment that her way was fine. Okay, dun sa point of view ni Mika, when she made this judgment on her work, akala niya, it's all good, it's all fine. The lesson isn't ask permission for everything. No, hindi yun yung lesson dito sa ating episode na to. It's narrower than that. When something is labeled final, locked, or already distributed to other people, that's exactly the moment to default to caution. Okay? Yun na yung magduduplicate ka, and wag na munang i-edit. Even if nobody is explicitly telling you yung rule na yon. So, if you do not expect your supervisor or your client to tell you na, uy, wag mo na munang i-edit yan. And actually, you have to duplicate it first before i-edit. Okay? It's a silent rule nga kasi sa pagtatrabaho. And as a VA, alalahanin nyo yan na if there's a report na lagi ninyong ina-update on a weekly, daily, or monthly basis or quarterly or how often that is, make sure that you duplicate it, mag-backup na muna kayo. Para kung papalitan nyo man, well, may mahuhugot pa kayong isang report, yung original report na, or pinanggalingang report. Anytime that your client asks you to get that original or yung previous month or previous week or previous day's report. So, where the client and the agency could have done better. Ito naman yung sa side ng client, ano kaya yung mas maganda sanang nagawa nila? And also, dun sa side ng agency. So, here's the harder truth. And it's one this episode tries not to shy away from. Nowhere in this relationship does it look like anyone sat Mika down. Okay, kung talagang pakikinggan nyo yung lahat ng nangyari, no one, the client nor the agency, hindi nila inupuan si Mika talaga. Early, and to say explicitly, here is how we handle finalized documents once they're gone out. Okay, wala talaga sa kanyang umupo at sinabing, hey, Mika, dapat ganito yung gagawin mo kapag yung isang document ay finalized na. The first time judgment comes up as a named concern is in the termination conversation itself. Not 3 weeks earlier. Not after the focus mode incident. Not as a specific, documented piece of coaching with an example attached. Concerns were apparently accumulating quietly on the client's side for a while before Mika ever heard the word judgment applied to her work. That's a real failure of the feedback loop. Yun na nga. Like I said, concerns were apparently accumulating quietly doon sa side ng client for a while before Mika ever heard the word judgment applied to her work. Actually, that's a real failure of the feedback loop. If a pattern is forming, the person in the pattern deserves to hear about it while there is still time to change course, not compiled into a farewell message. Okay. Clarify ko lang yun. Tatagalog ko lang yung part na yun. It's like saying na umabot pa, no? Or umabot na sa termination, but there was no coaching or no like heads up na ganun na palang nag-accumulate yung problema with the client. Now, why this is actually keeps on happening. So, this is structurally, nabubulol na ako, one of the most common failure modes in a remote client-VA relationships. And it's worth naming plainly as unclear ownership of the rules that everyone assumes are obvious. Version control on shared documents, and who's allowed to edit what, and once it's been called final. When silence is fine, and when it needs a heads up, none of this gets written into an onboarding doc. Because to the client, it feels too basic to say out loud. And to the VA naman, it feels too basic to ask about. Okay? So, nakikita nyo yon. Kung ikaw yung client, isipin mo, hindi na dapat to sinasabi kay VA, dapat automatic to. Ikaw naman na sa VA, ito yung mga tipong, pwede na ako mag-judgment call dito. No? Ang judgment call ko na to. Hindi ko na kailangang itanong pa yan dun sa kliyente. Okay? Gets nyo? So, it just sits there. Unspoken, until someone crosses a line nobody marked. And because there's a staffing agency in the middle, feedback has to travel through an extra hop before it reaches the person who actually needs it. Which means it arrives late. And it arrives compressed na as a pattern instead of as a moment. Okay. I'm not saying that dapat wala ng agency in the middle, na dapat direct hire or something. No. Actually, agencies help virtual assistants a lot in terms of finding job immediately. Okay? And tinutulungan na nila tayo, tayo mga virtual assistant, na doon sa step na yon. No? Kasi mahirap ding maghanap ng kliyente, di ba? Pero if there's an agency, you don't have to worry about that. Hayaan mo yung agency mo maghanap ng kliyente for you, and ikaw mag-prepare ka lang for the screening and whatever test that they might ask for you to do before you get hired. So, if you're a VA listening to this, the takeaway isn't ask fewer questions. Hindi po yun yung point natin dito. Mika's instinct to double check was, most of the time, exactly right. The takeaway is sharper than that. When a document is final, when something's already gone out, when you're not sure if a decision is yours alone to make, pause. Hinto muna. Duplicate and then ask a question. That one habit would have changed this entire story. And if you're a client naman or an agency listening to this episode, if you're tracking concerns about someone's judgment, say so early, specifically with an example, while it's still a coaching conversation and not an exit conversation. That's Mika's story. It's not a villain story. It's a story about the gap between I thought that was obvious versus nobody ever told me. And how expensive that gap can get for everyone standing on either side of it. I'm your host. This has been the Untold VA Stories. I'll see you next episode.